Hello, my name is Keane Southard. I am a PhD student in composition at the Eastman School of Music. And my presentation today for the Research on Contemporary Composition conference is entitled Music from Dreams in the Compositional Process, an Online Survey. So dreams, for hundreds of years, according to anecdotes, have been a source of musical ideas for composers. This is both in European classical music, where I found anecdotes from Beethoven, Tartini, Stravinsky, Ravel, Berlioz, and in particular, Berlioz's one is actually pretty funny. If you haven't heard of it, I don't have time to go into it now. Bruckner, I'm sorry for the spelling mistake there. Brahms, Wagner, and both Schumann's, Robert and Clara. There are also anecdotes outside of European classical music, such as Billy Joel in the popular rock and roll music genre. Paul McCartney, who probably the most famous instance of dreaming up music. He woke up one morning with the tune and the harmonies for Yesterday. It wasn't Yesterday yet, it was actually called Scrambled Eggs before he had any words for it. And Joseph Shabalala, who was the leader of Ladysmith Black Mambazo, the South African choral group. Both he and Billy Joel sort of claimed that all of their songs come from dreams in some way. And I also put myself in this category. As a composer, I have had dreams with original music in it that I have then used in some of my compositions. So I was very curious to understand how prevalent this is among composers. How prevalent are dreams that contain music amongst composers? And more specifically, and more importantly, how prevalent are dreams that contain original music? So music that the dreamer does not recognize as having existed before the dream. And my other question is, how is this original dream music used in the compositional process, if at all, for these composers that have musical dreams? So there's not very much previous research on music and dreams at all. So I'm just going to briefly go over the studies I found on this. So in 2006, there was a study that looked at both professional musicians and non-musicians, sort of mixed together. They found that of the dreams with music, musicians, 40% of their dreams had music, and only 18% of non-musicians' dreams. From the musicians' musical dreams, 55% of those were factual versions of known pieces. So things they had heard before and they recognized in the dream that it was something that already existed that they heard before. 17% were unusual versions of known pieces. So things they had heard, but somehow had been altered in some way and not quite the same. And then most importantly for me, 28% of them were unknown music, or what I call original dream music. So 10 years later, another group of researchers looked at a group of psychology students, music students, choir members, and others kind of all mixed together, and found that 12% of all recalled dreams included musical topics. And of dreams with music, 52% were known music, so very similar to the previous one, about the same, pretty similar numbers, 28% known but altered music, and 28% original new music. So pretty similar numbers, although not exact. In 2018, a study looked at much more participants. It was a much larger study, but these were just from the general population instead of specifically looking at musicians or students. They found a smaller occurrence of dreams that contain music. They found 6% as opposed to 12 in the previous study of all remembered dreams contain music. So fairly rare in the general population. But overall, about 45% of participants reported having musical dreams at some point. So almost half of people reported having some musical dreams. There was a small minority, 3%, that responded that 40 to 100% of their dreams contain music. So for most people, it seems to be a pretty rare occurrence. And of the musical dreams, 43% known music, 40% known music with alterations, and 17% unknown music. So this one was higher than the previous studies, although the unknown music, the original music, was pretty similar to the previous studies. And then the most recent study I found looked at psychology students, some who were musicians and played music in their leisure time. And some of those were about 1/3 of those who played music also composed music. And they found that, pretty similar to the previous study, about 8% of remembered dreams contained music. So for this study, I created an online survey of composers that I distributed via social media groups and email lists that focus on composers or on new music. And this was during the pandemic. So doing an online survey felt like a no-brainer at the time. So these were posted in Facebook groups that have to do with composition, email lists like the Society of Composers, Inc. Email list, and open for 5 days. Responses were anonymous, but participants could leave their contact info and become not anonymous if they were interested in potentially being interviewed about further about their experiences with music in dreams. And in all, I received 180 responses from around the world. So let's look a little bit into the breakdown of the demographics. So the respondents describe their status as a composer, a pretty good mix of professionals, semi-professionals, students, and amateurs, although a little more on the professional side generally. Age range, younger, the lowest, the plurality was in the lowest age group, 18 to 29, and each higher age group actually had less and less participants, which may reflect the fact that this was an online survey and perhaps some older composers, maybe not as comfortable with technology. In terms of a gender breakdown, about 3/4 of respondents were male. And while this is imbalanced, it is pretty reflective of the still prevalent imbalances in the composition field. And in terms of education level, most respondents had at least a bachelor's degree, some college education. Most had some sort of higher degree as well. Breaking down by nationality in terms of continental region, about 3/4 were North American respondents. And this is probably also a reflection of the fact that this survey was in English and also through the channels that it was distributed through. In terms of race and ethnicity, the majority will identify as white and Caucasian, which again is imbalanced, but it is fairly reflective of the imbalances of the composition field that still persists today. So on to the results. So the first question was, do you ever hear music in your dreams while asleep? And the overwhelming majority, 80% of respondents said yes, that they have heard music in their dreams at some point during their lifetime. This, of course, is a lot higher than previous studies, but this is focusing specifically on composers. And also, it does align with some of the previous research that showed that those who are more active and do more musical activities during waking life seem to have more musical dreams. So of those who have musical dreams, considering your dreams with music in them, how often is this original music as opposed to previously heard music? And for most people, the plurality was often, sometimes, even always. About one quarter of respondents said they always hear original music in their dreams instead of previously existing music. But a small, only 6% said that they never hear original music. And then the frequency of those who have had musical dreams, for most, it seems to be pretty infrequent. For the plurality, 44% was a few times a year. Also once a month or once a year or less. But for a small minority, 4 respondents said they always have musical dreams. All of their dreams contain music, which is very interesting. So then, of those respondents, of your dreams with original music, how often are you able to remember at least some of it upon waking? And the most common response was occasionally or sometimes. Although some either never can remember any of the music upon waking, and even fewer say they always can. And when you hear original music in a dream, do you ever capture it in a fixed form in order to remember it? Almost 70% said yes. They at least sometimes try to capture that original music. So in terms of the reasons for why they capture this original music, the most popular response was to potentially perhaps use it later in a piece, in a composition. Although people gave various other responses, like finding it as some sort of gift or significant because it's being given by some mysterious or spiritual process that they don't understand, which we will touch on in a little more. So of those who capture original dream music, how often do you do this? For most, it's an occasional or sometimes that they capture it in a fixed form. A few, it's a very often, they said often, and for even smaller, they always capture it. And the methods for capturing it, the most common one is by hand in traditional notation, although the other ones are fairly popular as well. Writing by hand in some sort of non-traditional notation, writing it into notation software, recording it into a device by singing it, or by playing it on an instrument into a recording device. And then this question, I believe, is really the heart of this study. So of all 180 respondents, have you ever used original music from a dream as material for a composition? And it was just about a 50-50 split between a no and yes or maybe, which I think is very interesting. It seems that it's pretty widespread amongst composers. So for those who answered maybe, their explanations for why they answered maybe, most of them said that it was because they're not sure whether the material was from a dream or not. So in terms of approximately how many different compositions of yours have used original music from dreams, the plurality of respondents, 44% said only in 1 or 2 pieces. So for most, it seems to be a pretty infrequent occurrence of using original dream material into a composition. But on the other side of the spectrum, 7 respondents, 8% of the 91, said they've used original dream music in 21 to 50 pieces. And approximately, in terms of what proportion of your current total bodies of compositions is this number, for most, again, 55%, makes up only 1 to 5% of their compositional output is compositions that use original dream music in some way. But then again, 2 respondents, very interestingly, 51 to 100% of their compositional output. So in terms of compositions that use original dream music, approximately how much of the composition is from or derived from the dream music? Again, the plurality of respondents gave only 1 to 10%. So it seems that the most common response is the original dream music is just a small part of the bigger composition. But some, 5 responded 91 to 100%, which suggests either fully composed compositions from their dreams that they're simply transcribing, or that material has been woven throughout the entire piece and is used in the entire work and is really the sort of DNA of the entire piece. And then, of course, there's plenty of respondents in the middle, the mid-ground as well. In terms of which aspects of the original dream music have these composers used as material, the most common response was using melody from their dreams. But harmony, orchestration, concept, rhythmic patterns, I apologize for the typo, or general feeling or mood, and even form and lyrics are not uncommon as well. So some interesting findings I found when I was going through the data that I'd like to point out. So it seems that amateur composers, at least in this data, appeared less likely than others to capture original music from their dreams for potential use in future compositions. So of the 82 respondents who reported capturing original music at some point, that broke down into 11 amateurs, 12 students, 34 semi-professionals, and 25 professionals. But the percentage of each of these who capture it in order to use it in a future composition, only 18% of those amateurs said they capture it to use it potentially in a future composition. Whereas for students, semi-professionals, and professionals, it was half or more. So to me, this suggests that perhaps maybe non-amateur composers make more practical use out of the original dream music that they find interesting. This may be due to professional composers and student composers having more deadlines, for commissions, and maybe be more willing to draw on any available sources for musical ideas that they have because they're in a little more of a time crunch to produce. Whereas amateurs perhaps maybe don't have as many set deadlines and can be a little more picky and choosy. Another interesting finding was that 9% of those who capture original dream music, which was 7 respondents, said that they do so because they ascribe some sort of intrinsic value, whether spiritual, mystical, or magical, because of the fact it came to them in a dream. So for example, this was a female, age 18 to 29, composer from the United States, white Caucasian, semi-professional with a master's degree, said, "I'm not really a religious person, but there's something godly about dreaming of music." Another stated, this Canadian female composer in her 70s, white Caucasian professional composer with a doctoral degree, said, "It's an almost magical process that the brain keeps composing when one goes to sleep. And all 7 of these who reported having used, they all reported having used original dream music in compositions as well, compared to about 3/4 of others who capture their original dream music. So this suggests perhaps those who view original dream music as having this mystical, spiritual, magical quality to it may value it more, and then perhaps be more likely to use it in a composition. So one other finding is that I found six participants mentioned that upon waking, they often find that their original dream music is not as interesting or of worse quality than it seemed when they were actually in the dream. And I actually add myself to this because this has happened to me too, that I'm dreaming the music and oh, it seems so cool in the dream. And then what I can remember when I wake up is really just uninteresting or banal or cheesy and not nearly as interesting as it seemed when I was dreaming. So 2 of those 6 respondents suggested that perhaps their dream music is less creative because their brain is relying on these already heard sounds, and they aren't using this sort of critical ear to filter out those sounds and musical ideas. However, there were 3 respondents who said that their original dream music actually was less inhibited and perhaps more true to themselves than their musical ideas from waking life. So there's sort of opposing viewpoints on this. One of those 3 said, this is a 60-year-old American male, white Caucasian, semi-professional composer with a master's degree, said, I think that dreams are much less inhibiting than real life. So in many respects, the music from my dreams is a little freer than what I would write while conscious. Sometimes I'm meeting up with a composer in the past and we work on music together, which is really fascinating. I've never had any dreams like that, but I'd love to meet up with Chopin and start writing some music or something in my dreams. So along those same lines, 18 respondents mentioned that dreams sometimes help them to solve some sort of compositional problems that they're having in works in progress in waking life, especially when they're experiencing like writer's block or composer's block, if you want to call it that. So this 70-year-old white male Caucasian with professional composer with a doctoral degree says, sometimes the music is a solution to a compositional problem in a piece I'm working on. Interestingly, music I conceive of in my sleep tends to be music that solves a problem I'm having with a piece in my awakened state. And that's actually interesting. I've read a source, there's a book by a psychologist at Harvard named Deirdre Barrett, who wrote a book and has done some studies on exactly this, problem solving, going to bed thinking about a problem and then using dreams to help find creative solutions to it. So it was interesting that I found some respondents who talked about just that. Also, 17 respondents reported original dream music as being hard to remember upon waking or too complex to capture in a complete way. And I'll add my own experience to that as well. I've definitely had frustrating experiences where dreaming this orchestral music that is very complex and is amazing and I find really interesting, and I wake up and it fades so quickly and I can't remember hardly anything about it, which is really frustrating. So just one example of this from a 18 to 29-year-old male from the UK who's white, Caucasian, student with a bachelor's degree, says, I get fleeting impressions, oftentimes hearing music in its entirety, but I often can't fully dissect it. I'll remember the melody and basic accompaniments, orchestrational principles. And past that, I have to rely on how the music made me feel and try to recreate that as best as possible. So I'd like to talk about just two very notable outliers that are not typical respondents in this, but are very fascinating to think about. So one was a male Portuguese amateur composer in his 50s with a doctoral degree who said he always hears music in his dreams. It's always original music. He's always able to remember at least some of it upon waking. He captures it occasionally by hand in non-traditional notation. He's used melodies and lyrics or text from his dream music in 21 to 50 compositions, which is approximately 31 to 40% of his total body of works. So a very important source of melodies and words for his music come from his dreams. And very interestingly, these compositions consist of half to 100% of music derived from the dream music. And he comments that it's a curse, music in the head all the time, asleep or awake, no rest. So the poor guy, he can't even get away from the music, even in his dreams. Another one was a female white Caucasian amateur composer from the United States in her 60s with some college education, but no college degree. She claims she hears music in her dreams a few times a week. It's very often original. She's always able to remember at least some of it and always captures it when it is original dream music. She says, like the Portuguese man, she hears music constantly in her mind, both while sleeping and awake. Although she doesn't feel it's a curse, she feels that very strongly that there's this sort of mystical and spiritual reason for the music coming to her, and that she has sort of an obligation to capture it and to share it with others. And she's used melodies, harmonies, and orchestration from her dreams in 21 to 50 of her compositions, which is about 41 to 50% of her total body of compositions. And very interestingly, she reports hearing the same music over the course of several nights in different dreams. She said that if she doesn't capture it, it'll keep coming back night after night until she writes it down, and then it will finally go away, which is also very fascinating. So a few conclusions and some ideas for future research. So this survey suggests that dreams are a source of musical ideas for a significant portion of composers, as half of respondents said they've used original music from a dream in a composition. For most, it is a pretty minor source, but for some, like our outliers, it plays a very large and important role in their compositional process. These composers use original dream music in various ways, and for a variety of different reasons, such as material for future compositions or breaking through writer's block or solving compositional problems they're having in waking life. So some future research ideas could be looking at the use of original dream music by composers in different genres and styles of music, because I did not ask about what genres or style of music these composers are composing in, and to see if there's any differences between composers working in different genres. Looking at composers versus improvisers. As dream music largely relies on the subconscious, perhaps improvisers might be more connected to that, because improvising on the spot, you have to rely on intuition, and you don't have as much time to think. You have to rely on unconscious and feel a little more. So that might be interesting to look into. And then also looking at original music from the hypnagogic and hypnopompic states. So these are the half awake, half asleep states that precede and follow sleep. As 5 participants mentioned, these states as really fertile ground for coming up with original musical ideas as well. And I'll add myself to that. I also find sometimes I do my best composing when I'm falling asleep in this hypnagogic state. And there's also one of those anecdotes. Wagner has a story where he was half asleep and dreamed up the beginning of Das Rheingold, that opening of the ring cycle. So thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing your questions and comments.